The desert sun scorched the barracks by mid-morning, turning the thin wooden walls into radiators that seemed to sap energy from everyone inside. Seiko Takahashi shaded her eyes as she stepped outside, balancing a tray of breakfast on her arm, the aroma of steaming rice and miso soup mingling with the dry, dusty air. Children ran barefoot across the dirt courtyards, their laughter carrying over the hum of the camp, a fragile echo of normalcy in a place where the world had been reduced to barbed wire and guard towers. Hiroshi and Emi clutched each other's hands, weaving between the legs of older kids as they practiced games that mimicked the lives they had lost, inventing worlds where fences could be crossed and freedom still existed. Kenji walked behind them, his boots crunching over the gravel, eyes scanning the horizon where the mountains rose like silent sentinels over the camp. He had grown accustomed to the patrols, the ever-watchful guards who treated him as a potential threat rather than a citizen, and yet the tension never fully eased. Each day was a careful negotiation of survival and dignity, an exercise in patience and quiet resistance. Families had carved out corners of privacy where possible, small rooms in barracks lined with sheets and crates. But even those were permeable, their thin walls carrying the whispered fears, frustrations, and occasional laughter of neighbors. Despite the harshness of the environment, life persisted. Mothers taught sewing and embroidery in shaded areas, creating blankets and clothing that were both functional and beautiful. Children attended makeshift schools, learning arithmetic and history while simultaneously absorbing lessons in resilience and adaptation. Kenji often helped with construction, repairing water lines or reinforcing barracks, taking comfort in the physical labor that at least allowed him to protect his family in some tangible way. Even amidst deprivation, the internees found ways to maintain community, to preserve fragments of culture and humanity, to remind themselves that they were still people, not merely numbers in a government ledger. Evenings brought a strange quiet, broken only by the occasional shout of a child or the clatter of dishes in communal kitchens. Seiko would sit with Emi on the small cot they had made into a semblance of a bedroom, telling stories of their home before the camps, the citrus trees, the smell of the ocean, the neighbors who had once waved across fences. Emi listened intently, her small fingers tracing the fabric of the quilt they had sewn together, imagining the lives they had lost, but refusing to let go of hope entirely. Hiroshi, older and more aware, would sometimes join them, asking questions about why the government had done this, why the country he had been born in now treated him as a stranger. Kenji's answers were measured, careful. "We do not control the fear of others," he said once, "but we control how we act, how we endure. That is what matters." Weeks bled into months, and the harsh monotony of camp life began to feel like a second skin. The internees learned routines, schedules, and rules, yet even in the most ordinary moments, there were reminders of injustice. Notices posted on the walls demanded obedience, curfews were strictly enforced, and guards' eyes followed every step. Yet, there was also courage in the small acts of defiance. A mother teaching her children a forbidden story, a group of men organizing a library from salvaged books, a teenager finding ways to help neighbors without drawing attention. Each act was a reclamation of dignity, a refusal to be fully reduced by circumstances. Kenji watched as friendships deepened and communities formed within the barracks. Families shared resources, offered comfort, and devised ways to celebrate birthdays, weddings, and holidays despite the barrenness of the desert. On one particularly hot afternoon, a small group of boys organized a baseball game in a dirt lot, improvising bases from tin cans and makeshift bats from wooden planks. The sound of leather on wood, the cheers and laughter, carried across the camp like a defiant anthem. For a few fleeting hours, the fences seemed less like boundaries and more like the frame of a stage where life continued, stubbornly and beautifully, against the odds. But the shadow of uncertainty, never fully lifted. Rumors arrived with letters, whispered conversations, and the occasional glimpse of the outside world. News of battles across the Pacific, hints of changing policies, and the ever-present question of when, or if, they would be allowed to leave. Families clutched onto these scraps of information, analyzing every word for hope or warning. Kenji kept his focus on practical matters, improving sanitation, coordinating with other families for food distribution, and maintaining a semblance of stability for his children. But in quiet moments, he allowed himself to imagine what life might be like beyond the fences. The dreams were vivid: returning home, rebuilding orchards, reconnecting with friends, and restoring a world that had been ripped away. At night, when the desert wind howled and the barracks creaked, Seiko often lay awake with Emi nestled against her chest. She thought about the uncertainty, the injustice, and the resilience required to endure each day. Memories of their old home came in flashes: the smell of flowers in spring, the chatter of neighbors, the familiar routines that had once seemed unremarkable. She told Emi stories of courage, of ancestors who had endured hardship, planting seeds of strength that would grow in the children even here, in the barrenness of the camp. These were stories not of surrender, but of persistence, reminders that even when imprisoned, the human spirit could remain free. Hiroshi, on the other hand, began to observe the subtle inequalities and prejudices in ways adults sometimes overlooked. He noticed how certain families were treated differently, how whispers of suspicion followed his friends, how small gestures of kindness or defiance could carry weight. He began to write in a small notebook, documenting events, recording stories, and noting the resilience of those around him. The act of writing became a private rebellion, a way to preserve truth in a world that constantly sought to erase it. One particularly bitter winter, the camp experienced a harsh storm that flooded the dirt paths and left barracks leaking and cold. Families huddled together, sharing blankets, firewood, and warmth. In those moments, the sense of community deepened. Survival became not just an individual act, but a collective one. Kenji worked tirelessly to ensure the barracks remained habitable, often going without sleep to repair walls, mend roofs, and distribute supplies. Seiko organized communal meals, ensuring even the weakest and most isolated received nourishment. Through acts both large and small, they created life in a place designed to suppress it. Amidst the monotony and hardship, glimpses of hope emerged. Some internees were allowed to leave for work in nearby towns, albeit under strict supervision, providing a brief window into freedom. Children received scholarships or letters of recognition from schools outside the camps, a reminder that their talents and humanity could not be erased. These moments, however fleeting, reinforced the determination of families to endure, to maintain dignity, and to believe that one day they would reclaim the lives stolen from them. The Takahashis, like so many families, came to understand the delicate balance between compliance and quiet resistance. Following rules ensured survival, but small acts, teaching forbidden songs, writing letters, challenging policies, or organizing educational activities, sustained their sense of self. In these acts, they found courage not just for themselves, but for the generations that would follow. Even within the oppressive confines of barbed wire and armed guards, they nurtured hope, creativity, and humanity, asserting that identity and loyalty could not be forcibly erased. And so, life in the internment camps continued, a tapestry of fear, endurance, and quiet heroism. The Takahashis, like thousands of others, learned to find beauty in small moments. A child's laughter across a courtyard, the smell of home-cooked food, a sunset over the desert mountains. These fragments of life, fragile yet resilient, became the foundation upon which families endured. They learned that even in the darkest circumstances, the human spirit could assert itself in laughter, stories, art, and care for one another. The camp walls could confine bodies, restrict movement, and impose fear, but they could not imprison hope. And in that truth, the Takahashis and countless other Japanese-American families found a reason to endure, to love, and to prepare for the moment when the fences would fall and the world beyond would once again become their home. Spring arrived slowly in the high desert, but with it came a strange sense of renewal. The barracks, still worn and weathered from winter storms, began to buzz with quiet energy as families cleaned, painted, and repaired what little they could. The Takahashis worked alongside neighbors, sharing brushes, nails, and advice. Each small improvement was a declaration of dignity, a refusal to allow the barrenness of the camp to define their lives. Hiroshi and Emi helped wherever they could, carrying buckets of water or sweeping the dirt floors, their laughter mixing with the chatter of adults and creating a fragile melody of life amid confinement. Kenji had begun to teach some of the older boys carpentry and repair skills, turning mundane labor into lessons in resilience. "We cannot control where we are," he told them one afternoon, as they hammered boards to reinforce a sagging roof. "But we can control what we do here, how we act, and how we take care of one another. That is how we remain human." The boys listened carefully, absorbing not just skills but values, learning that even in captivity, purpose could be found. Seiko, meanwhile, organized sewing circles and small gardens in dirt patches near the barracks. Despite the thin, rocky soil, they coaxed sprouts of radishes, beans, and herbs from the ground. Watching greenery emerge from the dust gave everyone a sense of accomplishment, a small victory against the harshness of their surroundings. Rumors of military service began to circulate. The government announced that Japanese Americans could volunteer for the army, a complicated proposition for those who were being treated as enemies in their own country. Families debated the risks and the implications. Kenji and Seiko felt pride mingled with anxiety. "We serve to prove loyalty," Kenji explained quietly one night, "but we also serve to protect what is right. It is complicated, but courage often is." Hiroshi listened intently, imagining his older cousins, neighbors, and perhaps one day himself, stepping forward into the unknown to fight for a country that had cast them aside. The camps themselves became hubs of quiet resistance and education. Makeshift schools expanded their curriculum, teaching not only standard subjects, but history, literature, and civics. Elders told stories of Japan, America, and the lives they had led before the evacuation. Young people formed clubs, learned music, and put on plays, asserting their creativity and intellect even under surveillance. Each act of learning, of self-expression, was a reclamation of freedom, a subtle insistence that their minds could not be confined. Kenji often took walks along the perimeter, observing the barbed wire, watchtowers, and distant desert. At first, the fence had been a symbol of humiliation, of suspicion imposed upon loyal citizens, but now it was also a backdrop to perseverance. He would think of the friends he had lost contact with, the orchards left behind, the shops and homes sold at a fraction of their value. Yet he also thought of his family, the community, and the children who would carry forward lessons of dignity, courage, and endurance. Even in captivity, life could be shaped by intentional choices, and he resolved to ensure that his children emerged not bitter, but wise and resilient. One summer evening, a small group of internees gathered near a makeshift stage. Hiroshi and Emi were there, sitting cross-legged on the dirt, eyes wide with anticipation. A group of older youths performed a play that dramatized the history of Japanese immigration to America, highlighting struggles, resilience, and the contributions of Japanese Americans to society. The audience clapped, laughed, and sometimes cried. Seiko wiped a tear from her cheek, grateful for these moments of shared humanity. For a few hours, the camp became more than confinement. It became a space for storytelling, for culture, for the quiet assertion that they were not defined by fear or prejudice. As the war dragged on, the internees heard news from both near and far. Reports of battles in Europe and the Pacific filled the air with a mixture of hope and dread. Some letters from friends and family outside the camps brought comfort. Others carried subtle warnings and reminders that prejudice persisted. Kenji and Seiko read each carefully, debating what to believe and how to act. The world outside the fences was not always kind, yet it remained a horizon to reach for, a promise of return and recovery. The Takahashis began preparing for the possibility of leaving the camp. They saved possessions, organized important documents, and made plans for the uncertain future. Kenji thought constantly about rebuilding the orchard, Seiko about re-establishing their home, and Hiroshi about school and friendships. Even Emi, still young, sensed the excitement and nervousness in her parents' words. The idea of leaving the camp became both a dream and a challenge, an opportunity to reclaim what had been lost while facing the daunting task of reintegration into a society that had questioned their loyalty. During those long months, small acts of solidarity defined life in the camp. Families shared food, took in neighbors who were ill, and taught skills to one another. Kenji helped construct a rudimentary library, collecting discarded books and donated materials. Seiko led classes on gardening and cooking, while youth groups organized sports and art programs. These actions were not grand gestures in the eyes of the world, but they were profound assertions of humanity and resilience in a place designed to strip it away. Even the children's games carried symbolic meaning. Hiroshi and his friends sometimes pretended to break through fences, imagining a world beyond the desert, a place where freedom and dignity could not be taken. Emi drew elaborate pictures of gardens, oceans, and homes restored, each stroke of her crayon an act of hope. Through play, work, and creativity, the internees asserted their identity and humanity, refusing to allow confinement to dictate who they were or who they would become. As autumn approached, the Takahashis received official notification that their family would be allowed to leave the camp under certain conditions. There was relief, certainly, but also apprehension. Life outside would not be easy. The home they had once known was gone, their belongings sold or lost, and prejudice still lingered in communities across the West Coast. Yet hope prevailed. Kenji, Seiko, Hiroshi, and Emi packed their few possessions, hugged neighbors goodbye, and stepped toward a future uncertain but full of possibility. They carried the lessons of resilience, courage, and community with them, ready to rebuild lives fractured by fear and injustice. The Takahashi's story, like that of so many Japanese-American families, would resonate long after the war ended. The scars of internment remained, but so did the quiet victories. The children educated, the community maintained, the dignity preserved. In every action, every shared meal, every whispered story at night, they had resisted the erasure of identity and asserted the humanity that the world had tried to deny. And as they walked away from the camp, toward a life they would have to fight to rebuild, they carried with them not only memories of suffering, but the enduring strength to overcome it. The Takahashis stepped off the bus into a town that seemed both familiar and strange. San Leandro had not waited for them. The streets were crowded with new faces, shops that had changed owners, and neighborhoods that had moved on without them. The smell of fresh bread from the bakery and the faint tang of citrus from nearby orchards brought memories rushing back. Yet the sight of boarded-up homes and unfamiliar cars reminded them that the world they had left behind had not remained idle. Kenji tightened his grip on Seiko's hand, feeling both anticipation and a subtle fear. Rebuilding a life was no small task, especially when the foundations had been forcibly taken away. Neighbors stared with a mixture of curiosity, suspicion, and, in some cases, relief. Some welcomed the returning families, offering small gestures of friendship or help. Others avoided them entirely, unwilling to confront the past or acknowledge the injustice that had unfolded in their own communities. Kenji felt the tension like a heavy cloak, and yet he resolved that bitterness would not guide his actions. Their home, though stripped of furniture and memories, could be rebuilt. The orchard could be replanted. Life could resume, albeit on different terms. Seiko immediately set to work, cleaning what remained, organizing what could be salvaged, and creating a semblance of home for Hiroshi and Emi. She cooked with care, drawing on recipes and traditions preserved even in the harshness of the camps, filling the rooms with familiar scents that reminded the children of safety and love. The children, though weary from months of confinement and upheaval, found joy in small discoveries: new neighbors, dusty books left behind in the library, stray cats wandering the yard. The house slowly began to feel alive again, infused with both hope and resilience. Kenji turned his attention to the orchard. The trees were neglected, some broken, others overgrown, but life persisted in stubborn green shoots. He worked from dawn to dusk, pruning, planting, and nurturing, understanding that the orchard's revival was a metaphor for their family's recovery. Hiroshi, inspired by his father, helped whenever he could, learning the patient rhythms of tending land, the slow, steady work of reclaiming life. Each day brought small victories: a sprout, a repaired fence, a meal shared without fear. Each day reminded them that they were no longer prisoners, yet the shadow of the past lingered quietly. The community of returning Japanese-American families struggled alongside the Takahashis. Many faced prejudice, lost businesses, and the challenge of rebuilding social networks that had been fractured by internment. Yet, there was also solidarity, a shared understanding that endurance and courage had preserved something unbreakable. Neighbors exchanged advice, shared resources, and offered emotional support. Schools welcomed the children cautiously, and employers slowly accepted the adults' applications for work. Life required persistence, patience, and a refusal to be defined solely by what had been taken. Hiroshi and Emi found solace in the routines of school and play. Hiroshi excelled in mathematics and reading, encouraged by teachers who recognized both his talent and the resilience forged in adversity. Emi, still small, loved to draw and garden alongside her mother, recreating the tiny patches of green they had cultivated in the camp. Both children carried the lessons of endurance, empathy, and community instilled by their parents. Even in moments of sadness or confusion, they understood that their family's story of imprisonment, endurance, and eventual return was part of a larger legacy that demanded dignity and courage. Kenji and Seiko also began to engage with local activism, quietly attending meetings, writing letters, and advocating for recognition of the injustices endured by Japanese Americans. Some neighbors resisted, unwilling to confront the past, but others listened, inspired by their steadfast commitment to truth. The Takahashis understood that rebuilding life was not only about restoring material stability, but also about ensuring that history would not be forgotten. Their children, they hoped, would grow up knowing both the pain of injustice and the power of resilience. Over time, memories of the camps became less immediate, but no less potent. Barbed wire and guard towers faded from sight, but remained etched in the mind. Seiko often shared stories with Hiroshi and Emi, recounting lessons learned, small acts of courage, and moments of solidarity. The children listened with a mix of fascination and solemnity, understanding that these stories were not merely history, but guideposts for living with integrity and compassion. Kenji, too, reflected often, recognizing that their survival had depended on courage, ingenuity, and an unwavering commitment to family and community. The orchard flourished with patient care. Citrus blossoms perfumed the air, a reminder that life could renew itself even after hardship. Neighbors began to accept the Takahashi's presence, some returning to old friendships, others forging new connections. Slowly, a sense of normalcy returned, yet it was tempered by memory and awareness. The past could not be erased, but it could inform a future built on resilience, justice, and hope. In the evenings, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Kenji would sit on the porch with his children, watching the orchard glow in the soft light. He spoke of perseverance, of the importance of remembering, and of the quiet strength that comes from enduring the impossible. Hiroshi and Emi listened, absorbing lessons not only of survival, but of morality, courage, and empathy. Seiko joined them, her presence a constant reminder of love and stability, even in a world that had once seemed determined to deny them both. Eventually, the nation began to acknowledge the injustice of internment. Apologies, reparations, and public recognition arrived slowly, decades after the fact, but they served as a measure of vindication. For the Takahashis, it was less about compensation than about the affirmation that their loyalty, humanity, and dignity had never been in question. They had survived, rebuilt, and continued to contribute to their community, embodying the principles of resilience, compassion, and justice that had sustained them in captivity. Hiroshi grew into a young man with a keen sense of justice and purpose, inspired by the stories of both hardship and triumph from the camps. Emi pursued her own passions, carrying forward her mother's creativity and patience. Kenji and Seiko, though older and marked by the trials they had endured, took pride in the lives they had rebuilt and the legacy they had passed on. Their story, once hidden behind barbed wire, became a testament to courage, endurance, and the unwavering belief that even in the darkest chapters of history, humanity could endure. And as the sun set over the orchard, painting the sky with hues of gold and crimson, the Takahashis reflected on the journey from confinement to freedom, from fear to resilience. The camps had attempted to strip them of dignity, yet they had emerged with strength, wisdom, and a profound understanding of the value of family, community, and moral courage. Theirs was a story not only of suffering, but of triumph, a reminder that even when imprisoned by one's own country, the human spirit could remain unbroken, carrying hope and resilience into the generations that would follow. Years passed, and the Takahashis' orchard thrived, a living testament to patience, perseverance, and the reclamation of life. Citrus trees that had once been neglected now bore fruit in abundance, their blossoms filling the air with a scent that seemed to erase, if only temporarily, the memories of barbed wire and desert dust. Hiroshi and Emi grew up surrounded by this vitality, their childhoods slowly reclaiming the normalcy stolen from them. Yet the past never fully disappeared. The stories of internment, of the nights spent huddled in cold barracks and the endless surveillance, were stitched into the fabric of their family's consciousness, serving both as warning and inspiration. Kenji would often walk among the trees at dawn, the quiet of the orchard, a stark contrast to the chaos of the camps. He thought about the friends lost to fear, the neighbors scattered by policies that had treated loyalty as a crime, and the resilience that had carried them through. Every pruned branch, every bud that opened, was a reminder that life could endure even after profound injustice. Seiko joined him at times, carrying baskets of fruit or herbs, and together they reflected on the journey from confinement to freedom, understanding that survival had been only the first step. Rebuilding required determination, vision, and the courage to trust in a world that had once betrayed them. Hiroshi, now a teenager, wrestled with conflicting emotions. He was grateful for the life his parents had restored, proud of the strength they had demonstrated, yet he carried the shadow of injustice. At school, he faced subtle reminders of prejudice, offhand remarks, whispered rumors, and the occasional outright hostility. Yet, unlike the camps, he had allies, teachers who encouraged him, friends who recognized his talents, and neighbors who had returned or moved to the area after the war. These small acts of support reinforced the lesson his parents had instilled. Dignity is maintained not only through endurance, but through engagement with the world, through courage in the face of adversity. Seiko, mindful of the scars left on her children, worked tirelessly to preserve both the innocence and the wisdom of their upbringing. She encouraged Emmy to pursue her love of drawing, giving her paints, pencils, and paper, and telling her that creativity was an act of freedom. She taught Hiroshi the skills of gardening, cooking, and repair, embedding in him the knowledge that work, care, and community were forms of resistance and survival. Through these lessons, Seiko and Kenji ensured that their children would grow with a profound understanding of both history and humanity, equipped to navigate a world that could be both unjust and beautiful. Community became a central pillar of the post-war years. Families who had returned from camps leaned on one another, sharing resources, celebrating milestones, and collectively processing the trauma of displacement. Annual gatherings, initially small and informal, grew into festivals and cultural events that honored the heritage and resilience of Japanese Americans. Kenji and Seiko participated actively, recognizing that remembrance was essential, not only for healing, but for ensuring that the lessons of internment were never forgotten. They spoke to neighbors, wrote letters, and eventually contributed to broader efforts to educate the public, weaving their personal experiences into the fabric of national memory. The scars of prejudice did not vanish overnight. Employment opportunities were limited, property had been lost, and social integration was slow. Yet, the Takahashis faced these challenges with the same resilience that had carried them through the camps. Kenji expanded the orchard, experimenting with new crops and methods, transforming the land into a thriving enterprise that not only supported the family, but contributed to the local economy. Seiko started a small cooperative with other women, producing textiles, preserves, and crafts, creating both income and a sense of shared purpose. Through these efforts, they reasserted their place in the community, demonstrating that they were not defined by past injustices, but by their contributions, integrity, and perseverance. Hiroshi, inspired by his parents' example, began documenting the history of Japanese-American internment. He interviewed neighbors, friends, and elders, collecting photographs, letters, and personal accounts. His notebooks grew thick with stories, each page a testament to endurance, courage, and survival. He recognized that memory was not only personal, but collective. Preserving these histories was essential to preventing repetition of such injustices. Emmy contributed through her art, illustrating scenes from stories told by her parents and other families, giving visual life to experiences that had often been suppressed or overlooked. As the years advanced, the Takahashis witnessed gradual recognition from the broader nation. Apologies, formal acknowledgments, and reparations arrived, providing a measure of justice that, while insufficient to erase suffering, affirmed the wrongs committed and honored the resilience of those who endured them. Kenji and Seiko, older now, reflected quietly on the irony that their loyalty and contributions had been questioned. Yet their persistence had ultimately transformed not only their own lives, but the awareness of a nation. They understood that history could not be rewritten, but it could be taught, remembered, and honored. Remembered and honored. The orchard became a place of gathering, celebration, and education. Children of returning families ran among the trees, youth groups held outdoor classes, and elders recounted stories of endurance and resistance. The landscape itself became a living classroom, teaching the values of patience, care, and resilience. For the Takahashis, the orchard was more than crops and fruit. It was a testament to survival, a symbol of hope, and a reminder that even when imprisoned by one's own country, the human spirit could not be confined. Hiroshi eventually graduated and pursued a career in education and historical preservation, determined to ensure that the experiences of internment were neither forgotten nor repeated. Emmy followed a path in art and cultural documentation, creating illustrations, murals, and exhibitions that gave visual life to the stories of Japanese-American resilience. Kenji and Seiko watched their children with pride, recognizing that the lessons of courage, dignity, and endurance had been successfully passed on. The family's journey from injustice to restoration became a microcosm of the broader Japanese-American experience, illustrating both the cost of prejudice and the enduring power of hope. In quiet moments, Kenji and Seiko would walk among the orange trees, the sun low in the sky, casting golden light across the orchard. They reflected on the journey from the cold barracks, through the deserts and barbed wire of the camps, to the reclaimed land they now tended. They spoke softly about the friends lost, the lives disrupted, and the resilience that had carried them through. The orchard, vibrant and thriving, was living proof that humanity, courage, and perseverance could endure even the harshest trials. And in those moments, as the wind rustled the leaves and the air carried the scent of blossoms and earth, the Takahashis understood the profound truth of their experience. Imprisonment had attempted to define them, fear had sought to break them, but love, courage, and endurance had prevailed. Their story, once hidden behind fences and fear, had become a testament to resilience, hope, and the unyielding strength of the human spirit. Theirs was a story not merely of survival, but of triumph, a legacy carried forward in the lives of their children, their community, and the generations yet to come. Decades had passed since the Takahashis were forced into the camps. The barbed wire, watchtowers, and dust-filled barracks no longer loomed over their lives, yet the memories remained, etched into the minds and hearts of those who had endured. Kenji and Seiko often sat on the porch of their home, now surrounded by a flourishing orchard, watching the sun set over the familiar hills. They were older, their faces lined with the passage of time, but their spirits remained resilient, strengthened by the trials they had overcome. Hiroshi and Emi had grown into adults who carried both the burden and the blessing of memory. Hiroshi became an educator, traveling to schools and community centers to share the stories of Japanese-American internment, ensuring that the injustice and the resilience it produced were not forgotten. Emi's art captured the human dimension of those experiences. Vivid illustrations of barracks, dusty courtyards, and moments of quiet courage that communicated truths beyond words. Together, the siblings embodied the fusion of history, memory, and creativity, honoring the past while shaping a future that would remember it. Kenji reflected on the arc of their lives, from the abrupt upheaval in San Leandro through the cold desert nights, the relentless monotony of confinement, and the painstaking work of rebuilding, to the quiet triumph of renewal. He thought of the neighbors who had been lost, of friends scattered by fear and bureaucracy, and of the countless others who had endured similar fates. Their suffering was a part of the nation's history, a chapter often ignored, but its lessons were vital. He understood that memory was not simply personal. It was civic, moral, and necessary. Seiko, too, found solace in remembrance. She had kept journals, letters, and mementos from the camps, small objects imbued with weight and meaning. Occasionally, she would show them to Hiroshi and Emi, explaining the stories behind each piece. "These are not just objects," she said once, holding a faded photograph of the barracks. "They are reminders that we survived, that we endured, and that we carry the lessons forward." The children understood implicitly. History demanded attention, acknowledgement, and action. The broader community of Japanese Americans had begun to receive recognition for their sacrifices. Public apologies, commemorative events, and educational programs gradually emerged, giving voice to those who had been silenced for decades. The Takahashis participated actively, attending gatherings, speaking to journalists, and helping to organize exhibits that documented life in the camps. Their story, like that of so many families, became a bridge between past and present, illustrating the consequences of prejudice and the strength of perseverance. In the quiet of the orchard, Kenji sometimes allowed himself to remember the camps not with bitterness, but with a solemn acknowledgement of survival and resilience. He recalled the nights spent in cold barracks, the long lines for food, the uncertainty that hung over every day. Yet alongside those memories were acts of extraordinary courage. Neighbors sharing meals, children playing under watchful eyes, small acts of defiance that preserved dignity in the face of oppression. These were the moments that defined them, that carried forward into the life they had rebuilt. Seiko would join him in reflection, often quietly. Watching the trees sway in the evening breeze, she thought of her own perseverance, of the strength required to maintain hope for her children, and of the community that had endured alongside them. Together, they marveled at what had been reclaimed, not just homes and orchards, but family, dignity, and a sense of purpose. The past could not be undone, but it could inform a life built on justice, compassion, and remembrance. Hiroshi and Emi continued to share their family's story, meeting with students, writers, and historians, speaking about both the injustice and the resilience that defined their experience. They understood that the lessons of internment were universal, that fear can lead to oppression, that prejudice can destroy lives, but that courage, community, and moral fortitude can endure even in the darkest circumstances. Their voices amplified the stories of thousands of families, ensuring that history would not be forgotten and that future generations could learn from the mistakes and the heroism of the past. The orchard remained a living symbol of recovery. Each blossom, each fruit-bearing branch, each cultivated plot of land was a testament to what could emerge from suffering when human beings refused to surrender. Families gathered there, children played, and stories were told. In the shadow of adversity, life had flourished. The orchard became both memory and hope, a place where lessons were passed down, and the resilience of a people could be celebrated. As Kenji and Seiko aged, they reflected not only on their own journey, but on the broader arc of justice and human rights. They understood that the internment of Japanese Americans was a stark reminder of the fragility of liberty, the dangers of unchecked fear, and the moral imperative to act with courage and compassion. Their story, and the stories of thousands of others, became living proof that even in times of injustice, dignity and humanity could prevail. One golden evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in vivid oranges and reds, Kenji looked over the orchard and thought of the generations that would come after. He saw Hiroshi and Emi teaching children, friends gathering to celebrate cultural festivals, and neighbors sharing stories and laughter. He realized that the legacy of endurance, courage, and hope had been successfully passed on. The fences, the guards, and the camps were gone, but the lessons remained. Humanity had prevailed, memory had been preserved, and life had reclaimed what fear had attempted to take. Seiko joined him quietly, their hands entwined. "We survived," she said softly, "and we thrived. That is what matters." Kenji nodded, understanding fully that survival was only the first step. Thriving, living with dignity, purpose, and connection, was the true measure of their triumph. Together, they watched the orchard bathed in sunset, a living testament to resilience, love, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. Their story, once hidden behind barbed wire, became a beacon of hope and a lesson for the nation. It reminded future generations that liberty must be defended, that prejudice can take many forms, and that courage, community, and love can withstand even the harshest trials. And in the quiet of the orchard, under the fading light, the Takahashi's journey came full circle, from unjust imprisonment to renewal, from fear to dignity, from loss to a legacy that would endure forever. Time moved forward, and the Takahashi's orchard stood as a living monument to endurance. The trees, once neglected and overgrown, now flourished with the care and patience of a family determined to reclaim life. Kenji and Seiko often walked among the branches, their hands brushing over blossoms and ripening fruit, And for the first time in years, they felt the deep satisfaction of having rebuilt not only a home, but a life grounded in hope, dignity, and resilience. Hiroshi and Emi had grown into adults who carried the lessons of internment in their hearts and in their work. Hiroshi taught history and civics, ensuring that his students understood the perils of fear-driven injustice, while Emi's art captured the human stories behind the statistics, bringing the experiences of children, families, and elders in the camps to vivid life. Together, they bridged the past and the present, giving voice to a story that had once been silenced and ensuring that it would be remembered for generations. The Takahashis reflected on the journey from barbed wire to orchard, from fear to freedom. They had endured humiliation, displacement, and uncertainty, yet their spirits had remained intact. Seiko remembered the quiet courage of mothers and children in the camps, the friendships that had sustained them, and the moments of laughter and learning that had defied confinement. Kenji recalled the patience and determination that had carried them through cold nights and harsh days, and the knowledge that their endurance had prepared them not only to survive, but to thrive. Recognition finally came, slow but meaningful. The nation offered apologies, reparations, and historical acknowledgement of the injustice suffered by Japanese Americans. While no compensation could undo the suffering, it affirmed the truth that loyalty and humanity had never been in question. For the Takahashis, this was not merely a matter of justice. It was validation of a life lived with dignity, perseverance, and moral courage. Even as the orchard blossomed, the family never forgot the lessons of the camps. They passed stories, photos, and objects to younger generations, embedding in them a deep understanding of resilience, empathy, and vigilance against prejudice. The past, they knew, was both a burden and a guide, a reminder that liberty and justice must always be defended, that fear can distort morality, and that courage takes many forms, from survival to teaching, from small acts of kindness to collective resistance. On quiet evenings, Kenji and Seiko would sit together, watching the sun dip below the horizon, the sky painted in hues of gold and crimson. They saw children playing among the trees, neighbors laughing, and life moving forward in a rhythm they had fought to restore. The orchard had become a sanctuary, a symbol of triumph over oppression, and a testament to the power of hope and community. The Takahashi's story, once hidden behind fences and suspicion, became a beacon of resilience. It reminded all who heard it that humanity could endure even when imprisoned by one's own country, that dignity could survive even when stripped away, and that the lessons of history were essential to ensuring a just future. And in the orchard, surrounded by the fruit of years of patience and care, the family finally felt the full weight of survival transformed into triumph. The camps had tried to erase them, but they endured. They had rebuilt, thrived, and passed on a legacy of courage. Theirs was a story not only of suffering, but of the enduring strength of the human spirit. A story that would live on in memory, in family, and in the generations that would follow. And as the sun set over the vibrant orchard, the Takahashis knew that life, with all its beauty, hope, and possibility, had ultimately prevailed.